You call for some noise in the kitchen in the middle of the night. But whenever you're physically claiming that you see something and you're freaking out and you're calling everyone and you're trying to grab a weapon and you're running from your room, you don't even call a friend over? Hey guys, this is Jules with True Crime Reactions. Disclaimer, everything stated in this video is my opinion and my opinion only. And just like everything else in these cases we discuss here on this channel, everything is alleged. Okay, we are now on to episode 4 of our review of the James Patterson book about the Idaho 4 case. Now, the reason why, out of all of the books that have been written, there's so many over on Amazon, out of all of the rest of them, I really wanted to dive into this one because there were a lot of people interviewed, over 320 interviews, I believe so. So even though a lot of this stuff, even now that I'm reading it, I can't find a lot of validity behind a lot of things. There's quite a few in here where I'm like, okay, I can see that. Like when it comes to things that they say that Michael Kohberger, Bryan's father, said to Jesse Harris, the man who owns the boxing gym. I believe those things. But when it comes to certain other things, I can see right through them. So that being said, that's why it captured my attention, and that's why we are going over it so in depth. Also because this book and the Amazon Prime series were set to release literally within a week or so of when the jury selection for the trial was supposed to start. And just like the Amazon series, there's so much misinformation in here. So the last video ended on November 5th, 2022, chapter 17, where Jim and Stacy are leaving from seeing the kids because of Parents Weekend being over with, and they're high-fiving each other saying, "We did it, our job is done." The next chapter, chapter 18, you guys, I'm just going to say this before I get started with this. The main reason why so many of us were looking at Kaylee and this being something to maybe do with Kaylee and possibly a crime of opportunity because of her being there last minute and so many other things is because we were told that she was invited to a formal by Dylan, one of the surviving roommates, and that Kaylee was extremely hesitant to do so. That information came from her own family. It wasn't until she actually got her Range Rover that she then apparently, again, according to her own family, decided that she just had to go back to Moscow basically one last time because she hadn't been living at the King Roadhouse in weeks and weeks. She'd been staying at home, working from home for the company in Austin where she was going to be moving to in just 2 months. She literally was so close. But that became a real big deal that Dylan invited her and that it was a big deal that Kaylee be the one that Dylan takes. Then, during one of the memorial services where a letter from Dylan was read, it became pretty obvious that Dylan physically went to Kaylee at her parents' house to ask her to this formal. And then going back to some of the interviews, we also heard that Dylan went down there and asked Kaylee to please go and be her +1 to this formal. I'm bringing all of that up and trying to make sure that you guys know where my brain is at whenever I read the beginning of this. Because, bro, okay. Friday, November 11th, 2022. The residents of 1122 King Road start pre-gaming around noon for this formal, okay? The next sentence. They have no intention of going to the official formal. I'm sorry, what do you mean? It then goes on to state that the youngest two, which would be Dylan and Bethany, prematurely left the house to live off campus where they are right now with Kaylee and Maddie. Kaylee was like asked to come by this person, okay? And it says that because of this, and because they are loyal to Maddie and Xana and Emily, they will not receive a warm welcome if they show up at this formal. So what are we supposed to think now? If this is true, what are we supposed to think? Because the whole thing was her hesitance. Her whole hesitance to go back to that formal. It took a lot of coaxing to get her to go. And so much of it was based around this damn formal with Dylan. Guys, I'm confuzzled. So it just goes on to explain that they just spent time at the King Roadhouse instead of going to the formal because they knew that they wouldn't be welcome there. So I'm just really confused. But that's where the pictures of them in those little black dresses came from, and it's describing all of the poses and all of the photos being taken. Now, this is where we get some more information about where the rest of the friend group really were during this next 24 to 48 hour-ish period. And basically at this point, everyone comes over except for Hunter Johnson because he's over working at the high school. And everyone over at the house are, drinking and taking pictures with each other and stuff like that. So then it talks about how around 6 p.m., they start talking about how the game is coming up where the University of Idaho played UC Davis. And it just basically goes on to talk about how those kinds of games go. It kind of just reminds me of how homecoming would be back in high school. Okay, so now we get to Saturday, November 12th, 2022. So it jumps from 6 p.m. the night before where everyone's hanging out, drinking and everything over at King Road, and then 8 a.m. on Saturday. It shows up with Emily waking up around 8:30. It's interesting that they start it with Emily, but then again, I guess she's the one being interviewed for this stuff. Now, this was a part of the Amazon series that was really sort of confusing because we've been told for years now, literally years now, that they pre-gamed over at the apartments next door. That infamous photo was taken at those apartments next door. The Amazon series made it sound as if everyone stayed and pre-gamed over at King Road the entire day. They don't mention at all anyone going over to the apartments next door. And honestly, when it's mentioned in here, it's one sentence. They put a lot into 1122 King Road, the address itself being pretty much in your face while they're giving this timeline. So again, Emily waking up and getting over to the Kibbe Dome at 8:30 to get started with whatever she needed to do for the game. Xana at this point is texting people and trying to get people to come over to the King Roadhouse because they are going to be partying and hanging out up until whatever they ended up doing later on in the day. And then it says that around 11:30, there was an urgent summons for people to get over there. And she was texting them lots of times. Josie said a dozen times to get over to King Road. Basically, by noon, these were the people over at King Road. Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, Ethan, Dylan, Bethany, Hunter, Chapin, Josie, Lyndon, Peter, and Hunter Johnson. Okay, so then by 1 p.m., they move over to the Whites, which is, again, where the photo was. And then it starts instantly talking about how Xana wanted to have everyone come outside in order to take pictures. And it turns out that Hunter Johnson is the one behind the camera. Apparently, he took quite a few pictures of them, including that infamous one. So then it goes to 3 p.m. and it starts talking about how this is whenever Hunter Johnson tells Xana and Ethan that he's going to be leaving at the end of the semester because part of his graduate degree needs him to be an intern somewhere in either Boise or Post Falls. Now, the series said that him and Emily had been living in Boise pretty much since everything happened, so I just assume that's where he chose to begin with. Really strange day to let that news out and then all this crazy stuff happens. That's wild. So then we have 4 p.m. and this is where we hear the same thing that we heard in the Amazon series where Hunter Johnson claims that he put his phone down and left it there for a couple of hours. And that's where Maddie and Dylan took a whole bunch of selfies and just left them on the phone. And they showed a couple of those on the screen in the series. But here is where things are weird and different. So in the series, Josie says that whenever Xana and Ethan left to go to the game, that was the last time that she ever saw Xana. We went over it, in the review, because I was like, the game? They left to go to the game? I wasn't really quite sure of that because just like with the party, there's no pictures or anything like that. So it was just, a question in my head. Now, the way that the book has it is that Hunter Johnson asks Ethan if they want to go to the game. And Ethan says no, because he has to go to the dance, the formal, with his sister, which we have seen photos and stuff of. So maybe Josie had it wrong, and in her mind she thought they were going to the game, but in reality they were leaving to go get ready to go to Maisie's formal. But she did say the game. Them leaving to go to the game was the last time that she saw Xana. But I guess she could have meant the last time she saw Xana was whenever she was leaving to go to the game. You know what? Let's just continue. Now it shows that by 7 p.m., the Theta Formal is happening, and Maisie is there with Ethan, and Hunter Chapin is there with Maisie's roommate. By 9 p.m., the formal is over, and this is where she talks about how she's tired and stays back at home to go to bed, but the boys want to go out and go to the party over at Sigma Chi, so they apparently grab themselves some sandwiches out of the fridge at their sister's sorority, and then head out for the night. 9:30 is apparently whenever the Chapin brothers get to the Sigma Chi fraternity house for the party. And according to this, Xana is already there. Now, that is one thing that I would love some more information on, because if it was between like 4:30 and 7 that Ethan would have had to have started getting ready in order to be at the formal with his sister, but then he didn't meet up with Xana until 9:30. Where was she from 4:30 to 9:30? Where was Xana the whole time? Because it doesn't give any of that specific information. Then we get down to 10 p.m., and this is where Ethan starts texting people to come and hang out. So at first, apparently, he texts Hunter Johnson, and Hunter Johnson tells him that Emily is asleep right now, and he doesn't feel comfortable leaving her home alone, but that once she wakes up, he'll like let him know or be over at the party. Something like that. It's kind of strange. So then at 11 p.m. is whenever he apparently starts messaging Maisie. So at 10 o'clock, he tries to get Hunter Johnson to come over. That's a no-go. An hour later, he tries to get his sister to come over, and she's not answering because she's asleep. Now, this is where, per her own words, she said this herself in the Amazon series. He says, "love you," at the end of the conversation. And she said that it was really, really weird because they don't say that to each other. So I've always wondered what that was about, because again, there's a lot of secrecy and a lot of just no real true answers. Literally everything that we have, the evidence from the very beginning in the PCA with Ethan and Xana's timeline, and technically Bethany's as well. Okay, let's just be for real. This is like literally split down the middle. It's Kaylee, Maddie, Dylan, Xana, Ethan, Bethany. That's literally what's happening here. Anyway, then when it comes to the evidence that started coming out, that differs from the original information. Then whenever we have a family member speak, whenever we have someone that was there during the 911 call, someone who was there during all this time, anyone else, the information doesn't match. It's really frustrating. So it jumps from the messages from Ethan to his sister that are really odd to her, the way they ended, okay, to now midnight, the Corner Club. We're at the Corner Club with Kaylee and Maddie. They are talking about Mark, the club owner, and just about how they try to keep it from underage people coming in and doing things they shouldn't. At 1:20, it says that this is whenever the girls decide that they're a little bit too inebriated and it's time to get on with life. It actually brings up the "I told Adam everything" thing, but it just states here, "I told Adam everything." Maddie says of Kaylee's quandary with Jack, but it doesn't say Jack D. Jack S., who they're about to mention here in just a second. It doesn't, not very specific. Then it says that Kaylee threw up her hands, worried that Maddie had overshared with Adam, the guy behind the bar. They swerve into their 8-minute walk to the Grub truck, and that's it. So, which Jack? Was it Jack D? Where's the proof of that, actually? Because I was told that this, gave proof of something, and that's not really proof of anything, especially since it doesn't mention who they're actually talking about. So now they are at the Grub truck at 1:30, and Kaylee orders the carbonara mac and cheese for her and Maddie to split. This is where they also mention how Jack Showalter has been to King Road a couple of times, that they think that he's a good guy. And they have it in here that they were flirting with him and asked him if he wanted to go to a party somewhere else. But he declined it, stating that he was tired, and that's whenever it says, "Speaking of, so are they." And then Kaylee texts the designated sober driver. Now, that's not technically what it is, not because of it not being like a designated driver or whatever, but because this person was not a student. Eric was like an associate of the university. His wife worked for the admin, department for the Moscow Police Department. There was affiliations there. So it wasn't the students, like they're trying to all of a sudden show David B being some sort of sober driver, putting him right there at the time of all this crazy stuff miraculously, after everything that we've already been thinking. But the whole them flirting with Jack S. and trying to get him to go to a party somewhere else, was there really a party somewhere else? Were they trying to get him to come back to King Road, if this is even the case? Were they trying to get him to do anything at all? Because they didn't really stand too close to each other. I guess it might be time to go back and look at the Grub truck footage, just like them being there. Maybe the conversation was actually had before they got to the Grub truck, because they don't even bother to tell him bye. They, flip him off basically and then take off. So I don't know. Then at 1:50, it says that Hunter Johnson texts Ethan and asks if he's still over at the Sigma Chi party because Emily is still asleep. Because remember, let me take this pin off of here. Remember that around 10 p.m., Ethan texted Hunter Johnson and said that Emily was asleep in the bed and he didn't feel comfortable leaving her alone, but that he would be over after Emily woke up. And so now it's almost 2 o'clock in the morning. It's been like 4 hours. Now, this is where it's also a little bit confusing because we do have the interview from Jeff Kernodle, Xana's father, that he did with a news place in Arizona, where he mentions the fact that he spoke to Xana and she told him that they were home. Now, me and another YouTuber that goes by Heather Fitzgerald had sort of put a couple of things together when it comes to Venmo transactions between Xana and Ethan at around a certain time with the pizza emoji, Domino's pizza boxes in the back of King Road and the trash can where the slider is. And then in the Linda Lane footages, the footages that show the cars coming in and out of the parking lots, you can see one that has like a Domino's pizza plastic thingy on the top of it, driving around at around the time frame, that would make sense for that. But then we now know that the judge put in his order that after 2 a.m., whenever the girls were all apparently talking about going to get food over in Kaylee's room, that Xana and Ethan apparently weren't home, and this is after 2 o'clock. Well, this portion of this go in lines with that, because this is 1:50 that Hunter Johnson texts Ethan asking, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, so 10 minutes later, Ethan responds to Hunter that he and Xana are still at the Sigma Chi party. That's 2 o'clock in the morning. So that also differs from the Amazon series, because the Amazon series said that at 1:40 was the last time that David B guy apparently saw Xana walking out of the Sigma Chi party. They have that timestamp on the screen. And considering it's such a short walk, that would almost be them trying to put it back at like the 1:45-ish time, which we already knew was a roundabout that wasn't correct for literally anyone. Like, no one at Moscow gave anyone the correct time for literally anything. They said it was 1:45 for all four, and it ended up that the girls were really like 1:56 in the morning. They actually put it right here. That 1:56, but it says Kaylee and Maddie head back home to King Road. And that's actually incorrect, Mr. Patterson. That's the timestamp on the security footage of them actually getting to their house, not heading to their house. Now, this is where it says that they chat in the living room. This is going back to the newer information that we're getting, where now Dylan is trying to claim that she heard Kaylee and Maddie talking on the couch. There's all of a sudden no mention whatsoever of them all being up in Kaylee's room, all being Kaylee, Maddie, Dylan, and Bethany, talking about going out to get food. Because at this portion in the actual factual evidence in the public interest website for Idaho, we have the timestamps that show that Dylan messaged Eric Gower, who was the same so-say private driver that just dropped Kaylee and Maddie off at 1:56. She then texted him a few minutes later, according to the court, to see if he was still driving around because they wanted to go out and get more food, which they didn't end up doing. Now, we do know that there's this mysterious DoorDash information when it comes to Xana and Ethan, because they're trying to say that it's for Xana, but everything being submitted is for Ethan. So they're not really proving their case with that portion of it either. But none of the times that they have given us for anyone actually getting home that night have been accurate. And the stories keep constantly changing. This is absolutely ridiculous that they're just glancing over the portion of the story that puts Dylan contacting the Eric Gower guy and all of the other things that came from that. It's just wild to me. But then this book has that at approximately 2:15 a.m., Xana and Ethan return home. But how do we even know that? How do we freaking know that? We don't know that at all. And then it says that 2:15, Kaylee and Maddie are on the couch chatting a little longer, and then they go upstairs and collapse on Maddie's bed. I've always believed that they didn't sleep in the same bed. They could have. I don't believe that they did. Then it starts talking about where Murphy is, and apparently Murphy is up in Kaylee's room. Now, again, I don't really believe that they fell asleep in the same bed. They could have, but there's also a possibility that that's just where they were placed after all of the fighting was done, because we really just don't know. We really have no idea, because the only people that can give us that information are no longer here. So everything is literally just being guessed and assumed. Dylan herself is literally in this house. She's given how many different, or at least on paper, how many different recollections is there of where everyone was? In one portion, she doesn't have any conversations with them whatsoever about going to get food while they're sitting up in Kaylee's room. But all of a sudden, they're on the second floor on the couch and Dylan can hear them talking. I'm sorry. Like, everything should be matching. Lies are the only things that change this much. The truth is consistent. But none of the conversation about going to get food is mentioned in here whatsoever. If anything, they just keep turning the attention to Kaylee needing information about what to do with Jack. Because then it starts the back-to-back phone calls because she wants him to come over. Which we sort of knew that. I've always just basically been under the assumption, again, I'm just assuming, that he just didn't want to deal with the situation. It has nothing to do with talking about the victims. Oh my God. This would be anybody. Okay. Anybody. He knows that she's leaving. He knows that she's in town temporarily. He's probably heartbroken still because she talks about him, or at least the book talks about him and the family talks about him. Like he's just this really sweet, soft-hearted guy. So apparently it's like a heartbroken type situation where he doesn't really want to be hurt anymore, maybe. So a lot of people were like, well, if he was asleep and he just missed the phone, it's not a big deal. But I remember hearing that like him and Adam and another friend went to get food and then went back and played video games for a while. So if he was asleep, okay, cool. If he was awake and ignoring the phone, I wouldn't be mad at him either. And I think that that's really what happened here, because Steve has made comments about not wanting to put blame on certain people for not answering the phone or something like that. So I really feel like he was just not wanting to deal with a drunk ex-girlfriend. Maybe he didn't want to go over there because he knew that they would probably sleep together and that it would just make it harder on him whenever she went to go leave. Maybe he was protecting himself. I mean, can't blame him. But here come all of the calls. They do the first, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth. And then here comes Maddie's phone doing more calls. And then Kaylee's last time of making the phone call to Jack's phone at 2:52 a.m. Now, I will also say there's a couple other calls in the middle of all of this. And this also coincides a lot more with the way that the original timeline went, because a lot of people do believe this was also maybe them trying to get help, possibly, because maybe they were hearing something, maybe they saw something. The back and forth with this is really the problem, because there was like one interview that the Goncalveses did where they literally said out of their own faces that they heard the voicemails. But then Steve is over, I believe it was Drunk Turkey. And it was asked again, and this time Steve like danced around it, put the blame, or at least the responsibility for the knowledge of that information, on Olivia and Christy, and then like danced around it. So A, we don't know for a fact it's actually them making the call. B, unless there's really a voicemail, how do you know that it was them, period? Or that, it wasn't really like a 911 type situation, because we don't really know. No one's telling us the truth about anything. So then it gets a little creepy, because at 3 o'clock in the morning, Josie realizes that her phone is outside in her car, so she goes out at 3 a.m. to get it. She describes it as being really foggy and really dark and really quiet. And as soon as she goes inside the house, Hunter locks the door, and he says he doesn't know why. He's never done that before. See, there were some people in the comments whenever we were discussing this from the series that wanted to argue with me and anyone else that was commenting back about the door lock situation. It was said twice. It was said for them being at the hotel the next day after the 911 call and all of the interviews and stuff, that they made sure that the doors were locked and every little noise was creeping them out. But they also did state that on the night of the crime, not only did David B., who all of a sudden is driving around King Road right at the time that all this crazy stuff went down at 4 o'clock in the morning, not only did he have some sort of weird intuition to apparently like hurry up and get out of there and get home, but we also heard that Hunter Johnson got up and locked the door, and that Emily made a statement about how he had never done that before and he didn't know why he did it either. He just did. And I questioned, did you have some sort of intuition really for real? Or, did you know something was going on and, just for safety as you lock the door? I mean, regardless of how anyone feels about anything, those are normal questions to have in that kind of weird ass situation, okay? Especially with the way part 1 actually ends, okay? If you actually watched the video before this, where I gave y'all a little bit of a preview, yeah, the questions are very, very valid. So we're still in the 3 o'clock hour, and this is where they mention how Xana is awake and scrolling on TikTok, and how DoorDash comes about with an order from the Pullman Jack in the Box, Was that actually validated and verified? Because a lot of people were questioning that. And again, the Jack in the Box bag, I know that Jack in the Box has been the confirmed order. We know that from the self-authenticating records. The problem is that it's coming from Ethan's account. And the TikTok time, this portion of it right here, where they put TikTok around the same time that she's ordering the DoorDash, actually makes a crap ton more sense than the timeline that they were originally trying to tell us. Unless there's two timestamps, which could be the case. They might have one for here and they might have one for after 4 o'clock. I don't know. All I know is that Idaho, which is Pacific Standard Time in Latah County in Moscow, and yes, there is 2 time zones in Idaho, but just because we're now in Ada County and it's a different time zone doesn't mean that suddenly and magically and stupidly that the time zones and the timestamps for which the original evidence was documented would suddenly change, because that's not how it works, right? Let's just keep that in mind. With them having it here, it puts it with the 3:16 Pacific Standard Time, again, the actual time zone where the King Roadhouse used to be. The 3:16 makes sense here. The 4:12 from the PCA still doesn't make a lot of sense because we have no validated movement. And after, Dylan apparently walks out of her room at some point, she does see Xana already on the ground. Now, the DoorDash doesn't get there until 3:59 in the morning. That is the timestamp on the actual evidence submitted when it comes to Ethan's DoorDash account. That is the timestamp for it being, I guess, like they took a picture or they scanned it or they pressed a button or they did something to mark that as the time that it got dropped off. What we don't know, and what we still don't know, even though we have all of this other information, is if it was handed to anyone. Even this just says 4 a.m., Xana's food arrives. And then it goes on to, it ought to be the ordinary end of an ordinary game day. Okay. Did someone hand it to her? Did they leave it on the back slider, like porch area? Did they put it next to the front door? Where did the order go? We still don't have any of those answers. And that's one of the biggest issues. Because right before all of this insanity with this plea deal, the information about who the DoorDash driver really, truly, actually was, out of all of the assumptions, all of the theories, the fat man, the long-haired, brown-haired, long-haired girl, whatever it was, all of those things were incorrect. It ended up being Molly, who is friends with Bill Thompson and gets pulled over quite a bit whenever she's driving around late at night and door dashing. It's literally like, if she's out, she's getting pulled over. As soon as the body cams for her coming out and saying, I'm friends with Bill Thompson, in Brett Payne's body cam one night in 2022, whenever he was pulling her over, all of a sudden, we have all of this. And I find it really, really odd because, again, at the plea hearing, whenever Thompson stood up and answered the question that the judge, well, I guess really more like gave the statement that the judge asked him to give when it came to technically presenting whatever trial evidence you would have been presenting, nothing about her ever came out. Nothing about the DoorDash driver and any of the rumored, non-verified boo-boo that came from finding out who she was. And if you've been around, then you know what I'm talking about. Okay. None of that came out. None of that was going to be presented. Now, she apparently, and I've seen it, I've seen a paper that looks like a summons. Early June, there was a summons for a Molly McDaniel to be a witness. But I think all it was really going to be was that she was the DoorDash driver. I don't think any of the stuff that came out with these other channels claiming to have talked to certain people and still not providing any proof, none of it was going to be presented. So why should I believe any of it? Now, again, they've given us the 3 a.m. hour up to the 4 a.m. hour, and now they're jumping to 4:17. And in none of this are they talking about how Dylan went to her room at 3:20, how she added a contact to her phone at 3:51 in the morning. None of that stuff's being talked about. It's now jumping to 4:17, and we know why. If you've been paying attention to the evidence, you know that they claim that at 4:17 a.m. on the camera that's 50 feet away from Xana's window, that whimpers and a thud and a couple of different sounds can be heard. Now, they played a portion of this on the Dateline episode, and I can't make out anything. Like, there's like what sounds to be like a thud type sound, but you can't make out like anything at all. We're going to see if we can get like original audio to stuff, because that was the most distorted, I don't know what this is supposed to be thing I think I've heard in a long time. But here at this 4:17 time, they're saying that Dylan is in her bed, drifting in and out of a fitful post-game day sleep. No, she's not. She was just adding a contact to her phone. How can she be drifting in and out of sleep while she's doing something that takes multiple things, like multiple steps in order to do? And then it goes into basically trying to say that all four, Maddie, Kaylee, Ethan, and Xana, are all talking on the couch in the living room at 4:17 in the morning. So if that's the case, which I highly doubt at this point, but who knows? Why was it originally said that everyone was asleep or in their beds or in their rooms by a certain time? But this here recollection, which is apparently what Dylan told Emily. See, that's why I asked whenever we did that review, how does it feel to know that she lied to your face? Like, all of the stuff from 2023 has to be different now. Even if Emily would have stopped paying attention to a lot of the loud, what about the truth? What about the evidence? What about the facts coming out in court? Honey, you were lied to your face. You were lured over to that house for something that little Miss Dillon was very well aware of. And I don't understand how more people don't see that. The facts are there. We've seen it in the evidence. This right here is them trying to hide the truth that they didn't want to come out at trial. I'm just not believing that they are going to allow us to have access to everything that we should technically have access to, because if it's evidence, it's a public record. And that means text messages. And that means everything on their phone activity when it comes to the timestamps for photos that were created, the data, the metadata for said photo, if they were able to retrieve them or not, we should be able to see what they are. I mean, that's what the evidence should be, right? They need to show it. So then it goes from them all hanging out on the couch and talking to now her hearing them stomping up the stairs, or stomping, which way up the stairs. Because remember, she's on the second floor. So I guess Bethany would have already been on the bottom floor, and Xana and Ethan wouldn't have to have gone up any stairs, so it would have just been Maddie and Kaylee using the stairs. Now, we did hear from Ann Taylor in court that at one point Dylan is claiming, again, according to Ann Taylor speaking in one of the more recent court hearings in 2025, Dylan claims at some portion of time that when she opens the door and looks outside of her door, that Kaylee is going up the stairs, and then she sees her turn around and run back downstairs screaming about how there's someone there. And at this point, Murphy is like chasing after her. Like he's at her heels. For them to have been in the living room talking, and then Dylan hearing everything and maybe opening the door to tell them to be quiet, because we do have to remember one of the original things was also that Dylan opened the door and yelled, "Shut the F up," because people were being loud. We also have to remember that music is being heard while this is going on, and even singing has been described as also being heard during this time. So no one was sleeping, no one was quiet. Things were definitely still going on in that house. And one of the other things that was also apparently said, this is coming from court documents, things that were said in the court hearings, is that Dylan also just thought that one of Ethan and Xana's friends was leaving for the night. And that's really convenient considering who was driving around at 4 o'clock in the morning now, all of a sudden, just self-admittingly. It's very strange. And then it starts saying that everything turns surreal, and so she's not sure whether she's dreaming or she's awake. But that then she hears someone frantically say, "There's someone here," which again goes back to what we heard in court, like I just mentioned, because whenever she's saying that she apparently saw Kaylee go up and then come back down, she's coming down in a panic saying, "Someone's here." I pay attention to that portion again because that also takes away from the whole they were in their beds asleep situation. If she's seeing someone, Kaylee, go up the stairs because they were in the living room on the second floor, that means they weren't in their beds. Even though we haven't heard from Dylan directly, everything about her recollection is everywhere. None of it matches. And that's also about Dylan because, again, she was adding a contact to her phone at 3:51. And in this retelling, it's going back to the original everyone was asleep, Dylan was in and out of sleep thing, and that's just not true. Then it talks about a thud and Murphy starting to bark. We also have to remember that we were told in one of the court hearings that both Payne and Mowry did some sort of test on the audio from the camera where apparently you can hear the thud and the barking, and that Murphy not only is apparently barking outside for the majority of the time, but that Murphy is barking outside for a good half hour after SV1 leaves the area, and then it abruptly stops, as in someone lets the dog in, shuts the door, and then all of a sudden you can't really hear anything anymore. Which is interesting because that's either the case, like the dog came in, the door got shut, and then suddenly it stops, meaning how could the camera have really picked up noises if the door gets shut and all of a sudden ixnay on the barking? Or something happened to the dog to make the dog abruptly stop barking. And there's still so much mystery around Murphy just by itself. Then it goes on and instantly puts the description of what Dylan is seeing as the firefighter. And that's not true at all when it comes to the recollections in courts. In courts, on the phone, talking to other people. And again, I was told by somebody who speaks directly to the family, who has done interviews with the family on their own channel, that whenever Jack Decor walked down there, he could hear Dylan on the phone saying the story about there being a guy dressed in all black with a mask on. That's why whenever Steve Goncalves asked Dylan at the memorial if she saw or heard anything, he wasn't expecting for her to say that she was asleep and didn't hear or see anything. He knew then that something was wrong and somebody was lying. And he probably knew it wasn't going to be Jack, because what would be the point of it being Jack? So now Dylan is saying, I didn't hear or see anything, I was asleep. Then here comes the PCA, and the truth comes out that what they were originally told from Jack was true. She did hear and see something. That was the whole reason why people were summoned over to begin with. So given all of that context, I don't understand how now, again, all this time later, even though we do have this firefighter situation, the information that we've gotten from the courts when it comes to the amount of interviews with Dylan that was done and the progression of how her recollection changed, it was a person in all black, a white person with a puffy eyebrow, like one puffy eyebrow, in all black. It didn't turn into this firefighter thing until a couple interviews later. And then all of a sudden, the firefighter person was also the one like carrying a vacuum-like object. His book is going straight to, she saw a fireman. That's not how the original stories were at all. Because we would have heard Emily be like, she called and said she saw a guy in some fireman stuff walking around the house. Or whenever she got there, she would have told Emily and them the story of this fireman. And that's not what ended up taking place. Even in the conversations between her and Bethany, it's about somebody being in all black. So again, why are we putting the fireman thing right out in the forefront? That's not the case. It then says that she apparently went to try to get her taser, but the battery was dead. We don't know if that's true or not, because if she didn't feel the need to run out of the house, and even after having a conversation with Bethany, neither one of them felt the need to run out of the house. And again, if she just thought it was one of their friends, one of Ethan and Xana's friends, leaving for the night, then what are you reaching for your taser for? And if you're reaching for your taser, then that means to me that you are aware that there is a dangerous situation going on, and yet again, you still chose not to call the cops. And I know that we're also hearing stories now about how Dylan's apparently like a cry wolf, that she does this all the time. Hears a noise, freaks out, calls people over. So in the middle of all of this shit going on, you're apparently so freaked out that you're trying to get a hold of everyone in the house and grabbing your taser, and you still don't do something that you have done notoriously, which is cry wolf and have people come over and bring their boyfriends so that they can check out the house because you heard a pot fall in the kitchen. But right now, in this time, you don't do any of those things. You call for some noise in the kitchen in the middle of the night. But whenever you're physically claiming that you see something and you're freaking out and you're calling everyone and you're trying to grab a weapon and you're running from your room, you don't even call a friend over? Then and there, you wait 8 hours. Knowing that, like, I know that they probably thought they were trying to, like, make people feel sympathy for certain things. But knowing that Dylan calls for help for literally nothing and didn't is a problem for me. And it even validates here on page 68 how Bethany and Dylan were talking about how, but Xana was wearing all black, and then talking about freaking out and going back to, no, it's like a ski mask almost. That's not describing a firefighter. That's not describing what a firefighter would be wearing. Also, I know that this is just like a here nor there type statement, but don't most people like put their phone on the charger whenever they go to bed? So the simple fact that she's like, my phone's going to die, and freaking out because her phone's going to die, and we also know that she was adding a contact just a few minutes before this, that's sort of like another clue that no one was laying down to go to sleep. They were actively doing everything. Now they have at 4:27 how Dylan then makes the decision to sprint over to Bethany's room, and how they stayed down there, clung to each other, and tried to like see what was going on and basically trying to comfort each other. And then it says by 10 minutes later at 4:37, all of a sudden the two girls just pass out. So you're telling me that after seeing someone in your freaking house, talking to each other about what this person is apparently wearing, freaking out so bad that you got to leave your room, 10 minutes after you get there, you just both go, I'm sorry. This is so stupid. And then, of course, it doesn't mention the fact that we now know that Dylan saw Xana on the floor while she was running down to Bethany's room, apparently. They just glanced right over that. But we also know that them going to sleep at all is a lie. The information that we got from Ann Taylor in court is that there is a small break in Bethany's phone, but then she's right back at it. For Dylan's, it's constant. It never, ever stops. And we also have to remember that there was going to be a forensic expert come out at trial to talk about all of the things. I'm pretty sure it would have been on both of their phones. But the one that was submitted for the defense paperwork was about Dylan, and also about the conversation that she would have had with her father that morning. And conveniently, I remember after the information for the text messages and the 911 call came out, Steve Goncalves made a comment about how there was a parent at the very next motion hearing that they had after that. There was a parent there that they had never seen there before. I bet you it was dear old daddy. And then it goes into Dylan still trying to figure out if she really was having a dream or not. You are not collectively having the same like freak out with a whole nother person and then can sit back and be like, oh my God, was that like a dream? Like it's physically affecting the other person in the room. Why would you? The fact that they're just trying to play it like this is disgusting. Anyone with common sense knows that this is all crap. And it's trying to say that Dylan woke up around 8 o'clock in the morning. No. She was on her phone all night doing all kinds of stuff. There was no coming to at 8 o'clock in the morning. Unless they're going to try to pretend like somebody else was in the house and doing all these things on Dylan's phone while she was asleep. No. No, not at all.
Shortly after the last text message, and I'm talking just minutes, DM and BF are doing different things on their phone that night as they get together that night. There's the period of time that they're together in that room, both before there's a break in activity. There's not really a break in DM's phone. That is pretty well continuous. And there is a break for BF, but it starts again right away.
But what it's claiming here is that whenever Bethany wakes up at 7:30, that she tells her parents about this so-say strange dream that Dylan had, and she's trying to like whatever it. But look at the call logs when it comes to Bethany. And this is just the stuff they're showing us. If you really just thought it was a dream, and it's like not a big deal and nothing that you need to worry about because it's not real, it's just a dream, then why are you calling back to back to back to back to back? You're calling cell phones, you're calling house phones from what it sounds like by the way that they're describing these numbers, and also calling an unknown person. Who is that, a lawyer? Like, I don't understand how they can sit here and pretend like we're not going to be able to just pull up the public record and see how full of crap this is. So now they're like, she agrees with Bethany. She must have hallucinated it. So are they trying to act as if Bethany was trying to like tone it down to Dylan while also frantically calling her parents between 7:30 and 8 something in order to tell them the story of something not being real? That doesn't even make any sense whatsoever. Then it jumps to 10:23 where they start trying to contact the rest of the people to see if they're awake or not, and jumps to a whole 11:49. And now it says now she's starting to panic. It wasn't a dream. So you let a whole like hour and like 20 something minutes go by and now you start to panic. Their timeline for reality just doesn't make any sense. I cannot believe how stupid this is. Then it goes on to where she calls Emily and she says, can you come over? Something weird happened last night. I don't really know if I was dreaming or not, but I think there was a man here and I'm really scared. Can you come check out the house? I texted Xana and others, but no one is answering. I'm in the basement with Bethany. I have so many issues with this because it really feels to me as if, like, if you pay attention to the facts and you look at everything that they were doing on their phones before this moment, contacting their parents, contacting all kinds of other people, doing all kinds of other things on their phones. This feels like she was told, call somebody else over. You always do it, Dylan. You constantly call people over there to check on things. You didn't check on anything. You didn't have anybody come over. You didn't call them over the way that you always do. Call someone over, Dylan. Have them check on it. Have them come over and be the ones that find out what's going on. It sounds like that's exactly what this is. And I could be wrong on the context. But there's no way, again, knowing everything that we know that they did on their phones, that this was just because. That this is just how it came out. This feels scripted. The whole thing is scripted. But this is also where I start questioning a lot about Hunter. Because it's really strange the way that they describe his behavior. And there's also a lot of things that are apparently true because of interviews. These people interviewed Hunter and Emily directly, okay? So I can't sit here and say that I can't sit here and believe these things because we know for a fact that they freaking interviewed them. The Amazon series is based off of that. They're in the series themselves. The way that they make this sound as if Hunter instantly just like got up and took off. The second that Dylan called, he didn't wait for Emily. He didn't wait for nothing. He just got up and jetted out of there. But he's also the first one that gets into the house. He goes inside and then he heads up the stairs and he sees that Xana's room is slightly ajar, which he finds odd because Xana never sleeps with her door open. I don't understand why you would know that about your friend's chick, but okay. He sees that she is lying like she fell backwards, face up from the doorway. So that's pretty much sort of how we heard it described by Dylan. Feet towards the door, head towards the wall, and in the same position really that I sort of figured that she was, which is in view of the doorway. That's pretty much how it's described in the PCA. And a lot of people, for some reason, don't have like 3D vision whenever they walk around, I guess, like that, because they don't understand how with the door being open a little bit, you could see somebody across the way. And it was a huge argument for a super long time about where she actually was. That's one of the only things that has stayed constant is the position of Xana on the floor. When it comes to Ethan, though, those stories have been everywhere. From the hallway to the bedroom on the floor to because of the stuff that the Goncalveses came out telling certain channels that they were told, and then they are now taking no responsibility to try to fix their mistakes. We were told forever that the girls called someone over to get Xana's door open because apparently Ethan's body was behind the door, blocking it, and they couldn't get it open. And that's whenever Hunter strong-armed the door open, got it open just enough to peek inside and see what was going on, freaked out and told the girls, get the F out and call 911. That's the story that we were told by the Goncalveses. That changed a lot when it came to the way that we could view this crime scene because Ethan being on, apparently now, this is what they're telling us, Ethan being on the bed, on his side, facing the wall, sort of like he was asleep, and the wounds that they're describing, they're a little bit different in the book than what we've sort of heard. So I don't know what's what, because again, they're getting their information from the Chapins, the people that would know what they were told. So whenever the truth came out that he was actually in the bed and not on the floor blocking the door, and the door was actually wide open the whole time, and it had nothing to do with the girls calling someone over to open it, that changed a major dynamic in the story. And they've never come out to apologize either for getting it wrong for so long and making everyone believe that. He has danced around the entire thing and tried to be like, oh, I thought it was the outside door. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. Because the outside door wouldn't have anything to do with Ethan being behind the door and blocking it. So no, you didn't. You made an entire story out of it and never tried to even apologize for the stupidity. But in this, it does say that he saw the blood all over the place, which a bunch of people were like, why is no one saying anything about blood? Why is everyone glancing over this? But on top of that, that's one of the things that we heard from the very beginning was that there was no trail in between the rooms. That's why it was so difficult for people to figure out what was going on at first. Was one of the reasons, because there was nothing leading between Kaylee and Maddie upstairs and Xana and Ethan on the second floor. There was no drips, no smears, no nothing that can make them believe, no nothing coming out of the door. But then again, here we have Xana's door open and Dylan seeing her on her way to Bethany's, and she's not seeing it. They've told us now that she saw Xana on the floor, but no mention of seeing red stuff anywhere. So at this point, Hunter is close enough or far enough into the home to be able to see the door ajar, to see where Xana is, and to see that Ethan is lying on the bed facing the wall. And then he turns around and calmly tells Dylan and Bethany to call 911 and stay outside. We were told by the Goncalveses that he immediately looked inside, turned around, freaking out, and said, "Get the F out and call the cops," screamingly. This is the opposite of that, which is just interesting. He's about to go back to Xana's room whenever he hears Emily. He stops Emily and makes her basically turn around so that she doesn't see what's going on, which I understand him wanting to protect his girlfriend from seeing her best friend like that. I understand that portion of that. That part makes sense. But then, instead of going outside and waiting for the cops outside, he goes in the room, apparently does check both of their pulses, which so many people were questioning that, because if they're covered in red stuff and Xana's fingers were almost completely severed and you're seeing all of these wounds everywhere, I mean, I get maybe the reason why he felt the need to, because there could have been, some light. It's very possible, just depending on the wounds. We don't know. I guess I can see that, but that also kind of tells me that maybe there wasn't as much red stuff, because he does apparently check them both. Unless that's just like instinct to him, I don't know. To a lot of people, it didn't make any sense because of how they were describing the scene. But then says that he goes around and checks the closets to make sure that there's no one else in the house, and that he sits down and waits in the living room. He has no idea at this point where Kaylee and Maddie are, but says that he's in the living room waiting for the police. Now, we know that it's only like 2 minutes before the cops get there. But just the simple fact that he, A, locked the door randomly whenever he apparently never ever locks the door ever, left the second that Emily got a phone call without even seeing what was going on, didn't wait for nobody, no nothing, made a beeline into the house and made a beeline straight to Xana's door, and then grabbed a blade and then stood in the living room while everyone else was outside, meaning he was in the home by himself the whole time until the cops got there. That's shady. I'm sorry. I don't like the fact that one of them was just in the house doing whatever they wanted to do until the cops got there. That's odd to me that he was just allowed to do that. Now, this is the end of part 1. This next section right here talks about Bryan. It goes from page 75 to page 128. So it's honestly not that much. Let me know what you guys are thinking so far about the timeline and all of the everywhere, and how now, the girls were talking on the couch instead of being upstairs. Honestly, if the whole thing about Kaylee, again, going up the stairs, being like freaking out because someone's up there and then coming back down, that tracks to them being in the living room and takes away everything that the state has said about them going up to go to bed together. Because even like before we had all this other stuff, I still questioned that. I questioned, did they really fall asleep in the same bed, or is that just like where they both landed? Because I just wasn't sure with everything that we've been told if there wasn't some running around the house and trying to save your life. But why no one ever ran outside is another thing that I just don't understand. Because think about it. How could, if this portion of this is true, how could Dylan say that she saw Kaylee going up the stairs, freaking out about someone being there, running back down the stairs with apparently Murphy at her heels, and instead of going out the slider or running down to the first floor and leaving the house, somehow she ends up in Maddie's bed? That really can only happen to me if there's more than one person. Because if someone is alerting the entire house that's apparently awake and eating DoorDash and doing all these things, how did no one manage to escape the home? One person cannot subdue that many people. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But again, let me know what you guys are thinking about all of this so far down in the comments. If you like the way that I present this information and give my opinion, Please don't forget to leave a like on the way out, subscribe to the channel if you have not subscribed already, and please don't forget to make sure that that notification bell is set to all so you don't miss any of my rants, reviews, reactions, updates, or deep dives. See y'all.